Hi, my name is Elise, and you're listening to Chatterbox Island English Podcast. Welcome back to Chatterbox Island English Podcast. I'm your host, Elise. If you're new to this podcast, hello and welcome. This is an all-English podcast, but we don't talk about grammar rules or vocabulary like other English learning podcasts. Instead, we just talk about some easy and everyday topics. And I usually put all the keywords of each episode down in the description, so feel free to check them out if you want to. I hope you'll find this show interesting, and be sure to subscribe if you enjoy the content.So in the last episode, we talked about the 4 essential causes of procrastination and how to stop procrastinating. If you haven't listened to that episode, you can go check it out after this one. And if you want to listen to any previous episodes of this podcast, you can click on any platform that you are listening to right now. For today's episode, we're going to talk about accents.If you're like me and English is your second or even third language, it's very likely that we have different accents when we speak English. But does that matter? The answer is yes and no. Depends on how you look at it. So in Taiwan, when we talk about standard English accents, you might immediately think of an American accent.In Hong Kong or other places that don't use English as a native language, a British accent might be considered as a standard English accent. But the thing is, there is no such thing as a universal standard accent, and not just in English, but in other languages as well.Let's take Mandarin Chinese for example, because I think many of you guys who are listening to this podcast right now speak Mandarin Chinese as your native language. And most of us are probably speaking it in a Taiwan's accent. However, if you're from China or other places that speak Mandarin Chinese, you might speak it in a different accent.So which one would you consider as the standard Mandarin Chinese accent? Or even in a broader sense, is Mandarin Chinese the standard Chinese? What about Taiwanese, Hakka, Cantonese, or other dialects? In the aspect of linguistics, a standard dialect is simply one local variety of a language that has become most publicly accepted in social institutions such as the media, the law, or the government. It's the same with English as well. Even the standard American or British accent, as we know, is only one specific accent in the US or the UK. That's why you might have heard of Southern American accents or Northern English accents in movies or in real life. But why are we so obsessed with the concept of the correct or standard accent? Well, a linguistic professor from Princeton University named Rosina Lippi refers to this as the standard language ideology, where many people believe that the dialect with the highest social prestige is also the only correct form of the language. But the truth is, all dialects and accents are valid and correct in terms of linguistics. I think this is one thing to keep in mind when we learn English or other foreign languages as a second or third language, is that there is no correct or standard accent. And more importantly, the accent doesn't matter, but the clarity of the language does.It's how we communicate with others. So while the accents might be irrelevant, the pronunciation is still important and is something that we can work on because it can straightly affect the communication that we have with others. But why does accent also matter? So in a study done by John Bao, a sociolinguistic from Stanford University, where he made repeated phone calls in answer to newspaper advertisements for apartments with different accents, he found out that when he spoke in African American accents or Mexican American accents, fewer apartments were available to him than when he used standard American English accents. And this is not because there's anything wrong with the non-standard accents, but because the listeners would judge the accents as markers of racial or ethnic traits that the listeners themselves considered undesirable. So this kind of accent bias can be found throughout any English-speaking country where one accent is considered more prestigious or even sometimes more suitable for high-status professional jobs. This means that millions of people might be judged simply by their accents, which can have a major impact on their lives or careers. So, to answer our biggest question of today's episode, does having an accent matter? I think it's really up to you to decide, or sometimes the workplace that you're in. Just because some people have biases toward others' accents, it doesn't mean that you have to play along or believe in their biases. If you're someone in power, you can decide not to reinforce that stereotype. And if you're someone who has a non-standard accent, it's really up to you to decide whether you want to try to lose a stigmatized accent for a possibly higher chance of success on an individual level. But just keep in mind that there's no such thing as a more prestigious accent or a more standard accent. It all comes down to people's bias and stereotypes. So what about you? Do you think having an accent matters? Do you try to speak in a standard accent when you learn a new language? Let me know in the YouTube comment section, Apple Podcast review section, or even our Facebook fan page. And that's all for today's Chatterbox Island English podcast. If you enjoy this episode, you can subscribe to our show on Anchor, Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, KKBox, and SoundOn. You can also find our shows on YouTube and go on our website, that's www.eisland.com.tw for more information. I'll leave all the links down in the description so you can check them out if you want to. I'm your host, Elise, and I'll talk to you soon in the next episode. Bye!